Matt Hartley is the director of the University of North Florida Interfaith Center, bringing students of different beliefs together. He was previously board chair of the Interfaith Center of Northeast Florida. He is a dad to a 13-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. Matt has been a proud Presbyterian for 30 years and was a youth pastor for 9 years. He finds spiritual sustenance at the intersections of our identities, whether it be religious and non-religious, or in our many other forms of human diversity. He plays the cello and loves movies. Welcome back to UUCJ, Matt Hartley.
Good morning. It's good to be with you all today. I have a little bit of an update. My kids are now 14 and 12. I was supposed to be with you a year ago this week, but I had COVID. And I got COVID from my now wife, Gabby. So Gabby is with me today. We got married in May. In some ways, it's been a great year, and in some ways, it has not. And I'm here to talk a little bit about that today. I'm the director of the Interfaith Center at the University of North Florida, and I like to think of my job like the Fast and Furious movies, but with religious diversity instead of cars. So if you're not familiar with these movies started out with street races and muscle cars, and they turned into these espionage thrillers with death-defying stunts and cars defying the laws of physics. For instance, being parachuted out of cargo planes or being launched into space. There is a space car. That's kind of what my work has felt like, especially the last 6 months, because the Interfaith Center at the university is housed within the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And I'm sure many of you are aware that diversity and inclusion has become an enemy of our state government. In fact, among the many laws that were passed this year that have troubled many of us, the governor chose diversity, equity, and inclusion as a special target, and he had several press conferences to announce his intention to defund diversity and inclusion programs at public universities, and then once that bill was passed and signed, multiple press conferences making me, my students, a target. So it's been a very difficult 6 months, and I won't sugarcoat that for you. What we think will happen at this point, as this law has taken effect on July 1st, and what it says is that public universities cannot use state or federal funds to fund programs that advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's what the law says. We're still waiting on guidance from the Board of Governors for the universities to tell us how to interpret the law. But sadly, what we think will happen is in the next month or so, all of our diversity centers at the university will be closed. And that means the Interfaith Center, it means the LGBTQ Center, it means the Intercultural Center, it means the Women's Center, and all of the staff who work for those centers will either have to be reassigned or will have to find new jobs if they don't want to be reassigned. And worst of all, our students will lose these resources, these homes for them on campus. DEI work on campuses can look a lot of different ways. Some of you are familiar with the way diversity, equity, and inclusion can be involved in hiring practices. At our university, our centers and our student work is a huge part of that. And so whether it's for our LGBTQ students feeling a sense of home on campus, that they have a place that truly values who they are, they come to UNF for that reason, or in my case, our interfaith students who are from diverse traditions. Some of them are Christian and part of the more predominantly Christian population, or some of them are Jewish and Muslim. Some of them are non-religious, atheist, but they have this mutual curiosity for each other, and they found this community that they can be a part of, and now these centers are going to be removed. So I want you to understand first the severe impact that is coming down for us in these areas. The last 6 months have been a difficult process of standing up to political intimidation, balancing joy and resistance, guiding students through advocacy and through grief, and allowing ourselves, those who do the work, that grief as well, sticking together in solidarity and finding partners who can help us sustain the work. So I mentioned that I like movies, and movies have helped me distance myself a little bit from the emotional difficulty during this time. So one of the ways that I think about my task over the last 6 months has been a Mission Impossible movie. So another movie with death-defying stunts. In the latest movie, Tom Cruise drives a motorcycle off a cliff. And this is not a special effect. He actually did this. In fact, he did it 6 times so that they could film it and get it in the movie. So that is the boldness that some of us have taken in speaking up for our programs at the university and in the state. It's not just our university, of course, either. Other universities are losing staff and having to reassign employees, and students are losing these resources. And so it felt important for me to speak up in some way to let people know that this was happening. And all the time I speak to people, even now, 6 months later, who say, I had no idea. Or they say, oh, I heard about that, but you're the first person I've talked to who's actually affected by this. And so what that meant for me is I am notoriously online, notoriously on Twitter especially, probably to my wife's chagrin. But I've found that social media, for all its faults, is also a megaphone. It's also a way to reach a lot of people who know you and people who don't, and to share with them what's happening on the ground on our campuses. And so through social media, I tried to share about the impact that this would have on our community, on our students. And eventually, through social media, I had some media sources reach out to me. Now, this is a complicated calculation when you work for an institution, and whether you're going to speak out in a way that the institution might not be pleased with. Ultimately, it's the state government who was putting forward these laws. And so as I spoke to media outlets and newspapers, I didn't focus on my institution, which was struggling to get things right. I don't know that we always did, but the real problem was this law that's attacking diversity. And so it sometimes felt like driving a motorcycle off a cliff and hoping the parachute would open. It was also important to guide our students through advocacy, to empower them with their voice. So understanding that it wasn't just my job to say something, but it was their job to speak up for themselves. And so I gave them opportunities to speak to media sources that I was speaking to, but they also just took it as their own responsibility on campus. And I was truly inspired and enriched by their efforts. One, for example, the student government of UNF has they have a survey that they do each spring on student attitudes towards a particular topic. And so they chose their topic to be, for this spring, attitudes towards diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and the particular centers that existed on campus. And they got 800 students to reply to this survey. And majority of these students said that they favored diversity, equity, and inclusion programs on campus, that they had had positive interactions with our centers. Not only did they take that survey, but the student government president then went to our board of trustees and presented this data. And not all the trustees were very happy with him for bringing that data to them. In fact, one of them said, "You're being too political." But of course, when it comes to diversity under attack, it's been made political by those who are attacking it. So I was so proud of our students for taking the lead and setting an example. And I also had to guide them through grief, though, as I guided myself through grief, because we have known for a while that what's about to happen was possible. We knew that the governor had a supermajority in the state legislature, and the way that he did these press conferences made it pretty clear that he was going to get what he wanted. And we didn't have much we could do to press back. We certainly sent people to Tallahassee to lobby, to speak to the committees that were looking at this legislation, but we were pretty sure that it would pass, and it did. And so we've been preparing ourselves for the grief of losing something that means the world to us, of our diverse communities on campus. And the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at UNF is really tight. The offices work very closely together. So the LGBTQ Center was founded in 2006, I think, and the Interfaith Center came along a couple years later. And from the beginning, those centers worked closely together. And you all know that religion and LGBTQ identity is often a very difficult dynamic to navigate, but it's something we were able to do in a healthy way on campus, empowering our LGBTQ community to, for those who are people of faith, to embrace it, for those who have been harmed by faith to be able to speak it, and for us to navigate that difficult bridge together. So that's part of the work that we've been doing together for over a decade. Not to mention our Women's Center and our Intercultural Center, which are like 30, 40, 50 years old at UNF. So there's a real grief in what we're about to lose in this cohesion and this togetherness. But as Donna sang, we pressed on. We had to press on. And we had to look for a way to sustain the work, because for myself and for others, we just couldn't accept that these communities, for students, that this work, that this sense of home and belonging on our campus would go away. So the next movie that I'm going to invoke is Apollo 13. I grew up on the Space Coast of Florida, Cocoa Beach area. So I grew up going out into my front yard and watching the space shuttle launch. And what a way to grow up. What a way to be a kid. And Apollo 13, which came out of my childhood, was just one of my favorite movies. And I think probably all of you know this is the story of the moon mission that went wrong. The capsule that had an explosion on the way to the moon, and they weren't going to be able to land. They were fighting for their lives. And an incredible team came together in ground control, and then also the astronauts working together in the capsule to bring them home. And there's a particular moment where they have to do an engine burn to get them into the right position to make it back to Earth. And they've had to shut down all of their electronics to save energy. They can't turn on their navigation computer, so they have to navigate blind, so to speak. But they need something to make sure that they're on course. And so what they figure out is they need to put something solid in their window. They need to keep a fixed point in space in their window while they burn their engines. And you're out in outer space, so what's the fixed point in space? It's home. It's Earth. And so as they burn their engines, they keep Earth in the window. They keep home in the window. And this is part of what has kept my heart alive in a very difficult time, is keeping home in the window. And for us at the Interfaith Center, what that means is this idea of sacred diversity, the idea that our differences are good, that they're very good. I had a chance to go to Germany during this period of time with a group of students from one of our campus ministries. This is a campus ministry, Jacksonville campus ministry, that works very closely with the Interfaith Center. And so a number of our students are involved. In fact, a number of our non-Christian students are involved. And so the pastor that's a part of this ministry, she took this group and she invited Gabby and I to go along as the other adults, so to speak. And this group was Christian students and spiritual but not religious students, and a Jewish student and a Muslim student. And we got to go around Germany together and see some sites that spoke to what we've been going through in an eerie way. Some of the darker things we saw were the histories of course, Nazism, and then of the Soviet regime in East Germany. But we also had a chance to have moments of celebration and worship together in some amazing places. And one of those places was in Mansfeld Castle, which is actually now kind of like a hotel you can stay in. We stayed in Mansfeld Castle for several days. And Mansfeld Castle has been rebuilt several times, but it goes back 1,000 years. And it has a chapel that goes back to the 1300s. And we got to go and worship in that chapel. Now, Mansfeld is one of the places that Martin Luther grew up. So some of you know the classic hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." Well, Martin Luther, one of the mighty fortresses that he looked up to see as a child was Mansfeld Castle. And on this trip, I had the chance to preach a sermon in that 700-year-old chapel with this interfaith group called Diversity is Sacred, using texts from my own Christian tradition, but also texts that the students brought from their Muslim traditions. A student who is non-religious brought a Harry Potter quote. We incorporated it all into this sermon. And we were with two other campus ministries that were predominantly Christian and white, and our group is very mixed in both religion and in ethnic and racial diversity. And these other groups, I won't say that the diversity on this trip was always easy. Diversity isn't always easy. But you could see, because their campus ministries had shaped them to value diversity, that they were trying to figure it out. It was kind of strange to them, this other campus ministry, but they were generous and kind, and we kind of found our way to each other. Our hope is in finding each other. One of the passages that I shared about sacred diversity is one of my favorite from the Hebrew Scriptures, and that's Genesis 1, in the beginning. Now, some of you maybe grew up in places where there was a literal interpretation of that passage, and so some of us, me too, struggled with faith and science and those questions, and that could sour passages like Genesis 1. But it was really liberating for me when I began to see Genesis 1 as this beautiful poem, this ancient understanding. Not an understanding that we have today that's scientific, but a beautiful understanding of order and indeed diversity. So this is how the story goes. In the beginning, there is a spirit hovering over the undifferentiated waters. This is the ancient understanding, the primordial understanding of non-being, these just roiling, undifferentiated waters. And then the voice of God says, light and dark and land and water and creatures and humans. And so an order begets diversity. Diversity not just of humanity, but of all things, of creatures, of the whole earth and the whole cosmos. And so I'm holding on to this story as an inspiration in this time, that the way of things, the meaning, the purpose is diversity. And even in the scientific telling, we have the Big Bang, right? And the Big Bang is this undifferentiated energy burst that bursts out into light and matter and plasma and planets and creatures and humans. And then there's string theory, right? Have you heard of this? The idea that beneath everything, there's this everything is strings vibrating. That there's this vast variety and this hidden unity. So whether we call diversity sacred or we call it just a part of the fabric of reality, it's something that we can celebrate together. So I've been holding on to that idea, and I've been inspired by one of my heroes of faith, Miles Horton, Miles was the founder of the Highlander Folk School. He was a minister who turned to organizing, and he organized coal miners, and later during the civil rights movement, he invited people to the Highlander Folk School to learn together how they could stand up to racism. And Miles talked about the time when they shut down the center in Tennessee. It got shut down by local authorities, and they put a padlock on the door. The center had to move, but it still exists today. And what Miles said was, you can't padlock an idea. You can't kill it, and you can't lock it up. It will grow wherever people take it. And so I want to finish by giving you some hope about the future of our work, but I also think it's hope for our collective future. I think we're all a little bit worried about what's going on in our country and our state, whether we're concerned about the division, whether we're concerned about the injustice. I think we're all looking for some hope that we can find each other. And so I keep on going back to this poem by Gwendolyn Brooks that was shared. The idea that we are each other's harvest, we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond. And that was not a naive hope for Miss Brooks. She's joining her words with Paul Robeson, and both were black Americans who grew up during the evil of Jim Crow, the violence and the segregation. And somehow out of that, Paul Robeson, the great singer, was an activist, and Gwendolyn Brooks uttered these words, that we are each other's harvest. Somehow there's hope that we can find each other in the midst of the injustices that we face and the divisions that are between us. One of the examples of this recently that encouraged me was the campaign of our new mayor, Mayor Deegan. I think wherever you fall on the political spectrum, one of the extraordinary things about her success in her campaign was that it drew people from every party together. And hers was a campaign that went everywhere too. It went all over the city to different, I saw her going to different faith communities, going to different cultural communities, going to different civic and business organizations. She really went everywhere. She said she wanted everybody at the table, and she acted like it. And so I think it's an encouraging thing to see that work in Jacksonville. It holds some promise for how we can find each other in our own city. And first of all, I want to thank you, because I think this is a congregation that's been doing that. So when we talk about reaching out, you all have been reaching out for many years. Some of you have been here for a while. Some of you have just joined, but this has always been a congregation that has reached out. I was here in 2018 when we were seeing the separation of children from their parents at the border, and this church said, yes, come over, we'll have a rally here in this sanctuary. So I know that you have been reaching out. I think all we've got to do is continue to be creative and innovative and think about how we can find new allies for the work. And that's what I've done with our work for the Interfaith Center. So once I realized that the center might go away and we might not be able to continue the work through the university the way we had before, I said, well, how do we continue the work? Because it can't end. So I started going out into our community. There was a business DEI event, so I went to that event. There were funders who have connections to philanthropy. I went and met with them and talked about money. I went and talked to every faith leader that I could. I've been in pulpits preaching sermons like this for about 5 weeks. Went everywhere I could because I knew I was not some kind of savior or Superman that was going to save this. I knew that the win would have to be a community win. And so the good news is that we have found organizations that are willing to support our interfaith students on campus. And I want you to know that interfaith work is continuing not just through the students, although they're ready, they're trained, they're going to do it on campus, but also through community organizations like One Jacks and others who have said, we've got your back. We're going to help you support this work on campus. So even though the university may have to close these offices, we're going to ensure that our students still feel a sense of belonging in their diverse identities on campus. So let me take a brief and lighthearted detour to return to the Fast and Furious movies for a last time. You might be able to tell that I'm a big fan. Has anyone seen all the movies like I have? No? No one has seen all of them? Yes? Okay. Wonderful. My person. All right. Familia. Family's a big theme in these corny movies. So one of my favorite scenes, our hero Dom Toretto has found a car high up in a skyscraper. I'm not even going to try to explain it. He has to start driving fast. Again, not going to try to explain it. So he starts driving so fast in this skyscraper so that he can break out of that skyscraper, crash out of it, cover the gulf to the next skyscraper, and crash safely into it. Now, this is a Fast and Furious movie, so do you think they only did that once? Does it twice, right? So crashes out that one into another one. This is while his friend Brian is yelling, "Cars don't fly, Dom." And so eventually the car succumbs to gravity, but they survive. But that's what my job has felt like the last 6 months. Fast and Furious with religion instead of cars, trying to jump this work from one skyscraper to another. In the weeks and months to come, my hope is that our local community and our campus community can rally together to support our students of diverse identities. That may look something like jumping the car from one skyscraper to another. In other words, moving some of our support for students into the community. When we do that, we'll be calling on our neighbors for help, and I hope that we can call on you. This is what we can all do. There's a role that each of you can play. There's a role that UUCJ can play. That when powers and principalities attempt to divide us, when they attempt to weaponize our diversity, our hope is in finding each other. Imagine that. When we look around us at our neighbors, at those who are different, that we see not threats, not rivals, but one human family. Not someone to defeat or rule over, but someone to welcome. May we do that for each other. Thank you.